My name is Glenn. I'm a student here at JTech, and today I'm going to go over transmission components, the power flow in a manual transmission, as well as a couple of scenarios with things that might go wrong or common customer complaints and what might be the issue. Alright, so here we have our input shaft. Input shaft is going to spline to pressure plate. Friction disc more specifically, which attaches to the pressure plate, which attaches to our flywheel. Then following down the line, we're going to have input bearing, counter bearing. We have our input gear here. You can see the dog teeth on the hub of our, that'd be third, fourth synchro. And we have 1, 2 synchro right here, down here. So this input gear, so this is the counter gear. Then we get into our drive gears, which first drive, second drive, third drive. So these are, this is a constant mesh transmission. So since we have third drive, we have third driven, second drive, second driven, first drive, first driven. Back on this side, we have our reverse. Usually the way to identify which one's reverse and fifth is reverse is going to have spur gear, whereas fifth will have the helical gears. So we got fifth driven, fifth drive, or reverse driven, reverse drive, fifth driven, fifth drive, and then right here we have our fifth reverse synchro. This is going to be your output shaft bearing, and this is where you're going to spline into the drive shaft. Up here we have our shift forks, which determine which gear you shift into. This will be your first, second shift fork. Here's your third, fourth shift fork, and then on the back side here is the fifth reverse shift fork. So we have our input shaft here. This is going to be our output shaft. This is the counter shaft. The hubs here are going to be splined onto the output shaft. So when the shift fork comes over and engages the dog teeth on the driven gear, the output shaft can spin along with the input shaft and counter shaft. Alright, so now let's go through power flow scenario. So obviously we've got your crankshaft spinning over here, flywheel attached to your friction disc or clutch disc, spins your input shaft. These are constant mesh, they're going to be constantly spinning. The only time, these are spinning while the output shaft is not spinning. The only time they start spinning is when you shift into a gear. So if I have a little difficulty with this one actually shifting, but if we were to slide this over, or we'll call it slide it over here, we'd be in third gear. So our power flow is going to come from the crankshaft through our input shaft to the input bearing, counter bearing, over to our third drive, up into our third driven. Shift fork would be pushed over, our sleeve would be engaging the dog teeth, which would be spinning the hub, and the hub is splined to the output shaft, spins the output shaft, sends the torque down to the output shaft, and the output shaft splines into the drive shaft. A couple of common complaints you might get dealing with automatic or manual transmissions would be, say the clutch pedal was kind of spongy. That would most likely be caused from air in the line. Kind of similar to spongy brakes, it's going to be air in the hydraulic brake fluid, similar in a clutch. Another common issue would be, which along the same lines could be, it's get hard to shift, or the gears are grinding when you go to shift. Basically that means that the clutch isn't, or one thing it could be is that the clutch isn't properly disengaging, so it's actually spinning faster, or spinning closer to the same speed as the engine, and it's going to be harder to shift it into gear when you do that, so you need to be able to fully disengage the clutch so the gears aren't spinning so fast that you grind, or it's hard to shift the gear into, or the sleeve into the dog tooth. Another common issue might be a gear slipping out of slipping out of gear. So you shift, say for instance, you shift it into third, and it slips out of gear. One thing that could be wrong is your dog teeth are worn, they're rounded off. They're supposed to be pointy. If they're rounded off, they're not fully engaging, and they can just slip right out of gear.